The text message read, "Please help. He broke my mom's arm." 9-year-old Luna Hayes's fingers were shaking so hard she could barely type. Her mother lay unconscious on the kitchen floor in pains and crying. The phone number Luna texted, it wasn't her aunt's. It wasn't the police. It was Titan Brooks, president of the Iron Wolves Blackstone chapter, a man she'd never met, a stranger who had no reason to care. But when his phone buzzed and he read those 5 words, the Iron Wolves did something that would change everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. The kitchen of 847, Willow Ridge Drive had seen better days. Peeling linoleum, cabinets that hung slightly crooked, a refrigerator that hummed too loud. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, the only sound that filled that cramped space was rage. Pure, desperate, chemical rage. Marcus Sterling stood in the center of that kitchen, his eyes wild and bloodshot, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from need. The kind of need that hollows a man out from the inside. That turns him into something less than human. $3,000. That's what he owed to people who didn't negotiate, who didn't give extensions, who collected debts in ways that made the evening news. Jennifer Hayes stood on the opposite side of the kitchen table, her back pressed against the counter, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She knew that look in his eyes. She'd seen it before, each time worse than the last. He'd been clean for 6 months once. 6 beautiful months where she'd allowed herself to believe, to hope, to imagine a future where Luna didn't have to tiptoe through her own home. But hope is a fragile thing and addiction is a patient predator. It always comes back. It always wins. I'm not asking you, Jennifer. I'm telling you. Marcus's voice cracked, swinging between pleading and threatening in the same breath. The emergency fund. Give me the card. Give me the pen right now. His words slurred slightly. Evidence of whatever he'd already put into his system that night. Pills? Probably. Maybe worse. The details didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the desperation radiating off him like heat. The way his fingers kept clenching and unclenching. The way he positioned himself between her and the only exit. Jennifer shook her head, her own hands gripping the counter edge behind her. That money is for Luna, for school clothes, for food, for keeping a roof over her head when you disappear for days. Her voice was steady, steadier than she felt, pulling from some reserve of strength. She didn't know she still possessed. I can't keep doing this, Marcus. I won't. Not anymore. The silence that followed was worse than the screaming. In that silence, Jennifer saw the decision form behind his eyes. The calculation, the collapse of whatever thin wall still separated the man she'd once loved from the monster addiction had created. Upstairs, unbeknownst to either of them, 9-year-old Luna Hayes pressed her ear against her bedroom door, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight against her chest, her breath coming in short, terrified gasps. She'd heard these fights before. She'd learned to make herself small, to disappear into her closet or under her bed, to pretend she was somewhere else, anywhere else. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like something was breaking that couldn't be put back together. What Marcus did next would land him in prison for years. But the real hero of this story, she was hiding upstairs and she was only 9 years old. Marcus lunged across the table, not around it, over it, scattering the remnants of a dinner. Jennifer had tried to make normal, tried to make safe. His hands found Jennifer's arm, fingers digging in with strength born of panic and chemical fury. Give me the goddamn money, he screamed, spit flying, pupils blown so wide his eyes looked black. Jennifer tried to twist away, tried to break his grip, her survival instinct finally overriding the part of her that had spent years making excuses, minimizing, protecting him from consequences. Her free hand reached for anything. The dish soap, a coffee mug, something to defend herself with. But Marcus was faster, stronger, more desperate. He yanked her arm backward with savage force. The sound that followed was something Jennifer would hear in nightmares for the rest of her life. Not quite a snap, not quite a crack, but something wet and wrong and final. A sound that meant broken. Her scream tore through the house, primal and animal. The kind of sound that comes when the body understands damage before the mind can process it. Pain exploded up her arm, white-hot and all-consuming, and her legs buckled beneath her. She crumpled to the linoleum floor. Her shattered arm twisted at an angle that made her stomach lurch. Blood began pooling beneath her. Whether from the fall or the break, she couldn't tell, couldn't think through the agony. Above her, Marcus stood frozen for exactly 3 seconds. His chest heaving, his face a mask of horror at what he'd done. But horror doesn't fix bones. Horror doesn't call ambulances. Horror in men like Marcus only knows how to run. And that's exactly what he did. He stepped over Jennifer's crumpled body, grabbed his jacket from the chair, and fled into the night, leaving behind a woman barely conscious on the kitchen floor and a little girl upstairs who'd heard everything, who'd heard her mother's scream, who'd heard the door slam, and who was about to make the most important decision of her young life. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the screaming. Luna stood frozen behind her bedroom door, her small hand still pressed against the wood, her rabbit dropped and forgotten at her feet. She'd heard the crash. She'd heard her mother's scream, that terrible animal sound that no child should ever have to hear from their parent. She'd heard heavy footsteps, the scrape of a chair, and then the front door slamming so hard the walls shook. And now nothing, just silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than any voice ever could. Mama. The word came out as barely a whisper. Her voice so small it didn't even reach across her own bedroom. Luna's hands were shaking. Her whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. She was 9 years old. 9 years old. And every instinct in her body was telling her to stay hidden, to stay safe, to wait for the danger to pass. But what if the danger wasn't passing? What if her mama needed her? The thought cut through her paralysis like a knife. And before she could talk herself out of it, before fear could root her in place permanently, Luna turned the doorknob. The hallway stretched before her like a dark tunnel. Every step down those stairs felt like walking through quicksand, her legs heavy and uncooperative. Her heart beating so loud she was sure someone could hear it. The house felt different now, contaminated somehow, like the violence that had erupted in the kitchen had poisoned the very air. She reached the bottom of the stairs and peered around the corner into the kitchen, and what she saw there would be burned into her memory forever. Her mother lay on the floor in a spreading pool of blood, one arm bent at an impossible angle, her eyes barely open and unfocused. She was making small sounds, not quite words, not quite consciousness, just the desperate noises of someone in shock and agony. Luna's entire world shattered in that moment. This wasn't supposed to happen. Mamas were supposed to be strong, supposed to fix things, supposed to make everything okay. But her mama wasn't okay. Her mama needed someone to fix things now. And there was nobody else. Just Luna. Just a terrified 9-year-old girl who still slept with a nightlight and couldn't reach the top cabinet in the kitchen. Mama, Mama, wake up. Please wake up. Luna sobbed, dropping to her knees beside her mother. Her small hands hovering over her mother's body, but afraid to touch. Afraid to make things worse. Jennifer's eyes flickered toward her daughter's voice. And for just a second, they focused. Really focused. And in them, Luna saw something that terrified her more than anything else. Fear. Her mama was scared. Her mama, who'd always told her monsters weren't real, was looking at her with the eyes of someone who knew exactly how real monsters could be. Panic flooded through Luna's veins like ice water. She had to do something. She had to get help. But who? Marcus was gone. The neighbors, she didn't know if they were home, didn't know if they'd even answer the door for a little girl. And then she remembered Aunt Rebecca, Mama's sister, who lived 2 towns over. Mama had made her memorize the number, made her repeat it over and over until she could say it backward and forward. For emergencies, Mama had said, this was an emergency. This was the biggest emergency of Luna's life. With shaking hands, Luna grabbed her mother's phone from where it had fallen beside the overturned table. The screen was cracked, but still glowing, still working. She unlocked it with trembling fingers. She knew the passcode, had watched her mama use it 1,000 times, and pulled up the message screen. Her vision was blurry with tears, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. But she started typing 555, then 27. No, wait, 28. Or was it 27? The numbers were jumbling in her head, panic making everything fuzzy and wrong. She typed what she thought was right, her terror brain mixing up digits she'd known perfectly just hours ago. The message poured out of her in broken fragments. Please help. He broke my mom's arm. Mom won't wake up. I'm scared. She hit send before she could second-guess the words, before she could wonder if they were enough, if they made sense, if anyone would understand the nightmare unfolding in this kitchen. The message disappeared into the digital void. That little whoosh sound marking it as sent. And Luna stared at the screen, waiting for the 3 dots. That meant someone was typing back. That meant help was coming. That meant she hadn't just failed her mother in the worst possible way. Luna had no idea that the number she just texted belonged to a man the entire town feared, and that fear was about to become her greatest protection. The phone sat silent in her blood-smeared hands. Seconds ticked by like hours. Luna looked down at her mother, whose breathing had become shallow and rapid, whose skin had gone pale and clammy, whose eyes kept trying to close and stay closed. No, Mama. Stay awake. Please stay awake. Luna begged, setting the phone down carefully and cradling her mother's head in her lap. She was so small, so helpless, and her mama felt so heavy and broken and wrong. Tears streamed down Luna's cheeks, dripping onto her mother's face, mixing with the blood and the fear and the desperate hope that someone, anyone, would answer that text. The phone buzzed just once, sharp and sudden in the awful quiet. Luna's head snapped toward it, her hand shooting out to grab it. Her heart leaping with desperate hope. A response. Someone had responded. She swiped the screen with a blood-smeared thumb. And what she saw made her breath catch. Not a text back, a phone call. The number she texted was calling her. But the voice that answered wasn't her aunt's. It was deeper, rougher, a man's voice. And in her panic-stricken mind, for one terrible second, Luna thought Marcus had somehow gotten her message that he was coming back. Her finger hovered over the red decline button. Her whole body tensing to run, to hide, to disappear. But something stopped her. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the universe itself reaching down to guide her shaking hand. Whatever it was, Luna pressed the green button and lifted the phone to her ear, and the voice that came through would change everything. 23 miles across town in a building most people drove past without looking twice. Titan Brooks sat at a scarred wooden table reviewing patrol schedules for the week. The Iron Wolves Blackstone chapter clubhouse wasn't much to look at from the outside. Weathered brick, barred windows, motorcycles lined up like soldiers in formation, but inside it was home to men who'd found brotherhood when the world had written them off. Titan, at 47 years old, had been president of this chapter for going on 12 years now. He'd seen things that would break most men. He'd done things he wasn't proud of. But he'd also built something here, something that mattered. A code, a family, a line in the sand about what kind of men they were going to be. The clubhouse was relatively quiet tonight. Few brothers scattered around playing pool, nursing beers, talking low about bikes and runs, and the everyday rhythm of their lives. Titan's phone sat face up on the table beside a stack of papers, a half-empty coffee cup, and his reading glasses that he pretended he didn't need. When it buzzed with an incoming text, he almost ignored it. Unknown number, probably spam, probably some kid who got his number confused with someone else's. But something made him pick it up. Maybe instinct, maybe fate, maybe just the restlessness of a man who'd spent too many years learning to pay attention to things that didn't feel right. He read the message once, then again, then a third time, his jaw tightening with each word. Please help. He broke my mom's arm. Mom won't wake up. I'm scared. 12 words. 12 words that painted a picture so vivid and so terrible that Titan felt something cold settle in his chest. The typos, the desperate punctuation. This wasn't spam. This wasn't a wrong number joke. This was real. This was a child in crisis, reaching out for help to someone who wasn't coming. And that message had landed in his lap instead. Titan had seen violence. He'd lived violence. He'd grown up with a father whose fists spoke louder than his words. Had spent time in places where violence was currency. Had worn these colors through territory wars and bloody nights that left scars on his body and his soul. But violence against a child, against a woman, that crossed every line his club stood for. The Iron Wolves had a reputation. Sure. The media loved to paint them as outlaws and criminals and dangers to society. Some of that was earned. Some of it was exaggerated. But one thing that was absolutely true, written into the very fabric of who they were, they protected their own. And right now, some terrified kid who'd reached out blindly in the darkness had just become their own. Titan didn't hesitate, didn't debate, didn't second guesses. He pressed the call button and lifted the phone to his ear. His other hand already raised a signal to Blade across the room that something was happening. The phone rang once, twice, then a small voice answered, so broken and terrified that it physically hurt to hear. Hello. The sobbing was uncontrollable, hitching breaths and tears, and the kind of fear that only a child facing something impossibly adult could produce. Hey, sweetheart, Titan said, his voice dropping into a gentleness that would have surprised anyone who only knew him from across a courtroom or a bar fight. My name's Titan. I got your message. I need you to tell me where you are, okay? Can you do that for me? There was a pause filled with crying and shaky breathing. And then that small voice came back, stammering and breaking. Who are you? Where's Aunt Rebecca? I need Aunt Rebecca. The confusion in her voice, the realization that she'd reached a stranger, almost broke through into fresh panic. I know, baby. I know you were trying to reach your aunt, and the message came to me instead. But that's okay. That's going to be okay. My name's Titan, and I'm going to help you. But I need to know where you are. What's your address? He could hear her trying to think through the terror, trying to remember something as simple as her own address while her world was falling apart around her. 847, Willow Ridge Drive, she finally whispered, and Titan was already writing it down, already motioning to Phoenix, who was moving toward him with a concerned expression. Good girl, that's so good. Now, is the man who hurt your mama still there? Is he in the house? Titan's voice stayed calm, steady, even as his own pulse started hammering. If this bastard was still there, if he was anywhere near this kid, the calculation in Titan's head was already shifting to scenarios that involved much faster action and much less talking. No, the little voice said, and he could hear the relief mixed with the fear. He ran away. He hurt my mama. And then he ran away, and she won't wake up, and there's blood, and I don't know what to do. Okay. Okay, sweetheart. Listen to me very carefully. You did exactly the right thing by texting for help. You were so brave. What's your name? A sniffle, a shaky breath. Luna. The name came out barely audible. Luna, that's a beautiful name. Luna, I need you to do something for me. Can you lock the front door if you can reach it? Can you do that? He heard movement, small footsteps, the sound of locks clicking. I did it, she whispered. Good. Perfect. Now, I want you to stay on the phone with me, okay? Don't hang up. I'm on my way to you right now. I'm bringing help. You're not alone anymore. If you believe a child's safety matters more than whose color someone wears, hit subscribe because what happened in the next 10 minutes will prove you right. Comment protect the innocent. If you believe real men protect children, no matter what patch they wear. Titan was already moving. Phone clamped between his shoulder and his ear as he strode across the clubhouse. Blade Phoenix Viper. Now his voice cracked like a whip and three men immediately dropped whatever they were doing and converged on him. There was no question in their eyes. No hesitation when their president called like that. You moved. We got a kid and her mother in trouble. 847, Willow Ridge Drive. Domestic violence. Mothers down. Kids alone. We roll now. The words were clipped. Efficient. And the response was immediate. Blade grabbed his cut from the back of a chair. Phoenix was already heading for the door. Viper crushed his beer can and tossed it aside, his expression hardening into something dangerous and focused. Four Harleys roared to life in the parking lot, the sound like thunder announcing a storm. These weren't men riding out for a fight, though they were prepared for one if it came to that. These were men riding out for a rescue. For a little girl named Luna, who'd sent a message to the wrong number and was about to discover it was exactly the right one. Titan kept the phone pressed to his ear as he swung onto his bike. The engine vibrating beneath him, powerful and ready. Luna, baby, you still there? He called over the rumble. I'm here, came the tiny, terrified response. Good. I'm coming. You hear that sound? That's me and my brothers. We're coming to get you. Stay on the phone with me, sweetheart. Tell me about your mama. What's her name? And as four motorcycles tore out of that parking lot and screamed through the streets of Blackstone Valley, Titan Brooks kept talking to a 9-year-old girl he'd never met, keeping her calm, keeping her connected, keeping her from drowning in fear while they closed the distance between terror and safety, between isolation and protection, between a wrong number and a miracle. The sound of 4 Harley-Davidson engines tearing through the quiet streets of Blackstone Valley at 9:47 on a Tuesday night was enough to wake half the neighborhood. Windows lit up as the formation of motorcycles blew past, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights, their engines roaring with purpose and urgency that had nothing to do with showing off and everything to do with getting somewhere fast. Titan led the pack, phone still pressed against his ear beneath his helmet, his right hand on the throttle, his entire focus split between the road ahead and the small, terrified voice on the other end of the line. "Luna, sweetheart, I need you to keep talking to me, okay? Tell me about your mama. What does she like to do?" Titan's voice was steady, calm, the kind of calm that came from years of staying composed when everything around him was chaos. He was doing what combat medics do, what hostage negotiators do, keeping her mind occupied, keeping her from spiraling into panic, keeping her anchored to his voice so she wouldn't feel alone in that nightmare. Luna's response came between sobs, her words stumbling over each other. "She likes to make pancakes on Sunday. She makes them with chocolate chips, and she always burns the first one, and we laugh about it. That sounds perfect. I bet they're delicious. I bet you help her make them, don't you?" Titan was through traffic. Blade tied on his 6 Phoenix and Viper flanking them like an escort formation. They weren't just riding fast. They were riding with precision, with purpose for men who'd ridden together for years and could anticipate each other's movements without a word. Sometimes, Luna whispered, "She lets me crack the eggs, but I'm not very good at it. I get shells in the bowl." Her voice broke on the last word. Reality crashing back in. "Is my mom going to die?" The question hung in the air between them, raw and desperate, and so heavy that Titan felt it settle in his chest like a stone. He could have lied. Could have given her easy platitudes and false promises. But children know when you're lying to them, especially children who've already learned that adults can't always protect them from the monsters in their own homes. "Not tonight," Titan said, his voice like iron wrapped in velvet. "Not while I'm breathing. We're almost there, Luna. 2 more minutes. Can you be brave for 2 more minutes?" He heard her try to answer. Heard the word yes come out as more of a whimper. And then he was turning on to Willow Ridge Drive, the broken pavement rattling beneath his tires, the streetlights flickering and sparse. The house at 847 was exactly what he'd expected and somehow worse. Small sagging paint peeling off the siding in strips like dead skin. One window boarded up. A chain-link fence falling over in sections. The kind of place where bad things happen and nobody looked too close because looking too close meant getting involved and getting involved was dangerous. The 4 motorcycles pulled up to the curb with a synchronized rumble. Engines cutting off almost in unison. The sudden silence after all that noise feeling heavy and expectant. Titan was off his bike before it fully stopped rocking. His boots hitting pavement as he pulled his helmet off and moved toward the house with long purposeful strides. The front door was closed, locked like he'd told her. A single dim light glowed from inside, barely visible through a gap in the curtains. "Luna," Titan said into the phone, his voice gentler now that he was here, now that the distance between them had collapsed to just a door and a few feet. "It's me. I'm right outside your front door. Can you unlock it for me, baby?" He could hear movement inside, small footsteps approaching, the scrape of locks being turned by hands too small to reach them easily. The door opened slowly, hesitantly, and what Titan saw on the other side made every instinct in his body scream to move, to act, to fix this. Luna Hayes was tiny, 9 years old, but looked younger. All big eyes and tear-stained cheeks and trembling lips. Her blonde hair was tangled. Her pajamas had cartoon cats on them and her hands, her small child's hands were covered in blood. Not her blood. Her mother's blood from where she tried to help, tried to stop the bleeding, tried to do something, anything to save the woman who was supposed to save her. Behind Luna, Visible through the narrow hallway and into the kitchen, Titan could see Jennifer Hayes's unconscious form on the floor. One arm twisted at an angle that made his stomach clench. A pool of blood spreading slow and dark beneath her. What Titan saw next made his decision instant, and when the police arrived, they couldn't believe what they found. Titan dropped to one knee, bringing himself down to Luna's eye level, making himself smaller, less intimidating, more human than the leather-clad biker with the graying beard and the patches that proclaimed him president of a motorcycle club most people crossed the street to avoid. "Hey there, Luna," he said softly, his eyes finding hers and holding them with a steadiness that said without words that she could trust him, that he was here, that the nightmare was ending. "You're safe now. We've got you." He opened his arms, not grabbing, not forcing, just offering. And Luna collapsed into them like a drowning person grabbing a lifeline. Her small body shaking with sobs that came from somewhere so deep they seemed to tear her apart. Behind Titan, Blade and Phoenix were already moving past them into the house, their heavy boots echoing on the worn floorboards. These weren't men who froze at the sight of blood. Blade had been a field medic in Vietnam before the war had broken something in him that never quite healed, right? Phoenix had pulled more than one brother out of wrecks and bar fights that should have been fatal. They knew what to do. Jesus Christ! Blade muttered as he knelt beside Jennifer, his fingers immediately going to her neck to check for a pulse. "She's breathing. Pulse is thready but steady. Phoenix, get me something clean for pressure on this arm. Viper, call it in now." Viper was already on his phone. His voice clipped and professional as he spoke to the 911 dispatcher. "We need an ambulance at 847, Willow Ridge Drive. Adult female. Severe trauma to the left arm. Compound fracture. Unconscious but breathing. Significant blood loss. We need them here now." He rattled off the information like he'd done it before, because he had. Because these men lived in a world where knowing how to handle emergencies was the difference between life and death. Phoenix tore off his flannel shirt, pressing the wet fabric against the worst of Jennifer's bleeding. His tattooed arms streaked with her blood as he worked with surprising gentleness for a man his size. Titan scooped Luna up in his arms, cradling her against his chest as he carried her away from the kitchen, away from the sight of her mother broken on the floor, away from the blood and the terror and the violence that no child should ever witness. She weighed almost nothing. This tiny girl who'd been forced to be so brave, who'd saved her mother's life with a misdialed text message and was now clinging to a stranger like he was the only solid thing in a world that had tilted sideways. "Come here, little one," Titan murmured into her hair, his voice rough with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. "It's over. You did so good. You saved her. You saved your mama. You understand. You're the hero here." Luna buried her face in his leather cut, her tears soaking into the patches and the fabric, her hands fisting in his shirt like she'd never let go. And Titan held her like she was made of glass and gold, like she was the most precious thing in the world. Because in that moment she was. The ambulance arrived within 6 minutes of Viper's call. Its sirens cutting through the night like a knife. Red and white lights painting the broken little house in strobing colors that made everything feel surreal and desperate. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, loading Jennifer Hayes onto a stretcher with careful precision while calling out vital signs and medical terminology that sounded like a foreign language to Luna, but meant the difference between life and death to the professionals working to save her mother. Titan stood on the front lawn with Luna still in his arms, her face buried in his shoulder, her small body rigid with fear. Every time she tried to look at what was happening and couldn't quite manage it. He'd wrapped his leather cut around her shoulders like a blanket. The patches and insignia that made grown men nervous, now serving as comfort for a traumatized child who'd latched onto him like he was the only safe harbor in a storm that threatened to drown her. When the ambulance screamed away from Willow Ridge Drive towards Sacred Heart Hospital, it wasn't alone. 4 Harleys followed in tight formation, their headlights creating a corridor of light behind the emergency vehicle, their engines a low rumble that somehow sounded protective rather than threatening. Titan rode with Luna perched in front of him, his arms caging her in safely, one hand on the handlebars and the other wrapped around her small frame to keep her secure. It wasn't legal. It wasn't safe by any conventional measure. But leaving her behind wasn't an option, and letting her ride in an ambulance without someone she trusted even less so. Blade, Phoenix, and Viper flanked them, creating an escort that looked like something from a movie. Outlaws racing through the night, not to escape the law, but to ensure a broken family made it to salvation. Sacred Heart's emergency room at 10:15 on a Tuesday night was relatively quiet until 4 leather-clad bikers walked through the automatic doors with a blood-covered child and faces that said they weren't going anywhere. The nurse at the intake desk looked up, her eyes going wide, her hand instinctively moving toward the phone that would call security. The Iron Wolves had a reputation in Blackstone Valley, and that reputation didn't usually involve hospitals unless someone was getting stitched up after a bar fight or hauled in by police. The sight of President Titan Brooks and 3 of his most trusted brothers striding into the ER, still wearing their cuts, still carrying the smell of motorcycle exhaust and urgency, made every hospital employee in the vicinity tense with a weariness that came from years of dealing with violence and its aftermath. Titan read the room instantly, saw the fear and suspicion, and raised one hand in a gesture of peace while keeping Luna close with the other. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and measured. The voice of a man who understood he looked intimidating and was deliberately diffusing the situation before it could escalate. "We're the ones who found them. The woman they just brought in and this little girl, we're staying." It wasn't a request. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple statement of fact delivered with the kind of certainty that made it clear arguing would be pointless. The nurse looked from Titan to Luna, saw the blood on the child's hands and pajamas, saw the way she was clinging to this rough-looking biker like he was her father, and something in her expression shifted from alarm to understanding. "The mother's being prepped for emergency surgery now," the nurse said, her professionalism overriding her initial reaction. "You can wait in the family area. There's a bathroom down the hall where the little one can get cleaned up." She directed them to a waiting area with plastic chairs bolted to the floor, fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead, and the smell of disinfectant and bad coffee that permeated every hospital in America. Titan carried Luna to the bathroom first, helping her wash the blood from her hands with warm water and paper towels. His large scarred hand surprisingly gentle as he cleaned between her small fingers, talking to her softly the whole time about nothing and everything. About how brave she was, about how the doctors were the best in the valley. About how her mama was strong and fighters don't give up. Back in the waiting area, Titan settled into one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs, and Luna immediately climbed into his lap, refusing to be even inches away from him. Her hand found his and clutched it with a grip that was surprisingly strong for someone so small. Like she was afraid that if she let go, he might disappear the way every other adult in her life seemed to. This hardened biker president, this man who'd spent decades building a reputation as someone you didn't mess with, who'd done time and fought wars, both literal and figurative, sat in that holding a terrified 9-year-old girl and speaking to her in tones so soft that Blade and Phoenix, standing guard nearby, had a strain to hear. He told her stories about his own daughter, grown now and living in Oregon, about the time she'd broken her arm falling off a swing and how scared he'd been, but how strong she'd been. He told her about the first time he'd ridden a motorcycle and how free it had made him feel. He told her anything and everything to keep her mind occupied, to keep her from drowning in fear. The doctors rushed Jennifer into surgery 20 minutes after arrival. And the moment they wheeled her mother past the waiting area toward the operating rooms, Luna's fragile composure shattered. She lunged forward trying to get to her mother, her voice rising in a wail that cut through the sterile hospital quiet like a siren. "Mama! Mama, don't leave me! Please don't leave me!" Titan caught her, pulling her back against his chest, turning her face into his shoulder so she wouldn't see her mother disappear through those double doors. Wouldn't see the 4 lines and the oxygen mask and all the medical equipment that made everything seem so much more terrifying than it already was. "Hey, look at me, Luna, look at me," Titan said, his hands on either side of her face, tilting her head up so her tear-filled eyes met his. "They're going to fix her. That's what doctors do. They fix people. They're going to put her arm back together and stop the bleeding and make sure she's okay. And I promise you on everything I have, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here with you until she wakes up. You understand?" Luna nodded, unable to speak through her tears, and Titan pulled her close again, rocking her slightly in that awkward plastic chair. His presence a solid wall between her and the terror that threatened to consume her. "Remember when Luna sent that text to the wrong number?" In this moment, it became clear it was exactly the right one. But while doctors fought to save Jennifer's arm in an operating room 3 floors above while Luna finally cried herself into an exhausted half-sleep against Titan's chest, Marcus Sterling was making the biggest mistake of his pathetic life. Titan's phone buzzed in his pocket and he carefully extracted it without disturbing Luna. Saw Detective Crawford's name on the screen and answered in a low voice. Brooks Crawford's voice came through clipped and professional. "We need a description of the perpetrator and a statement. You're the one who called it in." Titan glanced down at Luna, then at Blade, who immediately stepped closer to take over watch if needed. "His name's Marcus Sterling. Jennifer's ex or boyfriend, not sure which. Addict, violent, broke her arm because she wouldn't give him money. Kid said he ran when he realized what he'd done." He provided physical description from what Luna had told him during the ride. Height, build, distinguishing marks. But Titan didn't just call the police. He made another call, this one, to the clubhouse to brothers who were already on alert. Because when the president rolled out with 3 men on an emergency, the whole chapter knew something serious was happening. "Marcus Sterling," Titan said into the phone, his voice dropping into something colder, something harder. "Junkie just broke a woman's arm in front of her 9-year-old daughter. I want him found tonight. I want to know every hole he might crawl into, every dealer he buys from, every place he feels safe. And when you find him, you call me first. Nobody touches him. That's for the cops. But I want him found." The response was immediate, affirmative, and Titan knew that within the hour there would be riders checking every known drug house, every gambling den, every place a desperate addict might run to when the world was closing in. Justice was beginning to form, slow and inexorable as a gathering storm, and Marcus Sterling had nowhere left to hide. Detective Anthony Crawford had been working domestic violence cases in Blackstone Valley for 16 years, long enough to recognize patterns. Long enough to know that what looked like an isolated incident almost never was. When the call came through about a woman with a shattered arm and a child found by Iron Wolves members, his first instinct was suspicion. Bikers didn't just stumble onto domestic violence situations out of the goodness of their hearts. There was always an angle, always a connection, always something that didn't add up. But as he started running Marcus Sterling's name through the system while driving to Sacred Heart, the picture that emerged made his jaw tighten with familiar anger. Marcus Sterling wasn't just some guy who'd had a bad night. He had a record that read like a greatest hits compilation of human garbage. 2 prior domestic violence incidents. Both charges dropped when the victims refused to testify. 3 drug possession charges, 1 arrest for assault outside a bar that got pleaded down to disorderly conduct. A restraining order filed and then withdrawn. The pattern was textbook escalation, manipulation, a system that kept giving him chances he didn't deserve while women paid the price for his failures. Crawford had seen it 100 times, and it never got easier to stomach. What made this case different was the Iron Wolves connection, and that's what brought Crawford through the emergency room doors at 11:30 at night. His detective shield on his belt and questions already forming. He found Titan Brooks exactly where the nurse said he'd be, sitting in the family waiting area with a small blonde girl asleep in his arms, her face tear-stained and peaceful in the way only exhausted children can manage. 3 other bikers stood nearby like sentinels, their leather cuts identifying them as Iron Wolves, their postures relaxed, but alert in the way of men who'd spent time in places where letting your guard down got you hurt. Crawford approached cautiously, one hand near his badge, his expression carefully neutral. "Brooks, I'm Detective Crawford. I need to ask you some questions about tonight." Titan looked up, his eyes assessing Crawford in the same moment Crawford was assessing him. "Detective," he acknowledged, his voice low to avoid waking Luna. Asked, there was no hostility in his tone, but there was no difference either, just a man stating he was willing to cooperate on his own terms. Crawford pulled out his notebook, clicked his pen, and started with the obvious question. "How did you come to be at 847, Willow Ridge Drive tonight? What's your connection to Jennifer Hayes or Marcus Sterling?" Titan's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "No connection. Never met any of them before tonight. Got a text message from an unknown number. Kid asking for help. Said someone broke her mother's arm. I called the number, talked to the girl, got the address, and went." Crawford's skepticism must have shown on his face because Titan shifted Luna carefully in his arms and pulled out his phone with his free hand. "Check my phone. That little girl's text is timestamped at 9:47. We were on scene by 10:03, 16 minutes from message to arrival. We responded, where were you?" Crawford took the offered phone, scrolled through the messages, saw the desperate plea from Luna, saw the timestamp, saw the call log showing Titan had stayed on the phone with her for the entire ride. The evidence was irrefutable, and it completely upended Crawford's initial assumptions. These bikers hadn't shown up because they were involved in something shady. They'd shown up because a terrified child had accidentally sent a cry for help to a stranger who'd actually answered. Crawford handed the phone back, his respect for the situation shifting in real time. "That's good work," he said simply and meant it. "You probably saved her life and the kids." But as Crawford continued his investigation, pulling records and making calls, the picture that emerged got darker and more complicated. Marcus Sterling wasn't just a violent addict who'd hurt his girlfriend in a rage. He was a man circling the drain, drowning in deaths and bad decisions that were about to pull everyone around him under. The first twist came when Crawford got a call from a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit who'd been building a case against Marcus for months. "You got Marcus Sterling flagged?" the voice on the phone asked. "Yeah, domestic violence, assault." "Why?" Crawford asked. Already sensing this was going to be bad. "Because he's also under investigation for elder abuse and theft. Stole $15,000 from his own mother over the last 6 months. Drained her retirement account to feed a gambling addiction she didn't even know he had." Crawford felt his stomach turn. $15,000. Not just drug money. Not just a few hundred here and there. A systematic, calculated theft from the woman who'd raised him, who'd probably made excuses for him his whole life, who trusted him with access to her accounts because he was her son. And surely her son wouldn't betray her like that. But Marcus had, because addiction doesn't recognize family bonds or moral lines. It only recognizes need and opportunity. And the people Marcus owed that money to, they weren't patient creditors who sent strongly worded letters. They were the kind of people who collected debts with baseball bats and tire irons, who didn't care if there was a woman and a child in the house when they came calling. The second call Crawford got, this one from a confidential informant in the criminal underworld, made everything click into a horrifying bigger picture. Word on the street is Marcus Sterling was supposed to pay up tonight. Like tonight, the crew he owes, they were heading to his place around 10 to collect one way or another. Crawford looked at his watch. 10 o'clock, right around the time Titan and his brothers had been pulling up to that house on Willow Ridge Drive. If the bikers hadn't gotten there first, if Luna's misdirected text hadn't brought protection instead of just sympathy, she and her mother would have been in that house when armed debt collectors showed up looking for money Marcus didn't have. They would have been collateral damage in someone else's war. Caught in crossfire that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with the pathetic excuse for a man who'd brought violence into their lives. The worst part, Marcus's night was about to get even worse. If you think cowards deserve to face justice, comment no more lies. If you can't stand abusers who prey on the vulnerable, hit that like button, because this scumbag is about to learn what real consequences look like. Crawford coordinated with patrol units, putting out an APB on Marcus Sterling with instructions to approach with caution and apprehend on sight. He didn't have to wait long. At 11:53, barely 3 hours after he'd shattered his girlfriend's arm and fled into the night, Marcus Sterling was spotted behind Bruno's gambling den on the east side of town. The patrol officers who responded found him doing exactly what addicts and desperate men do when their worlds are falling apart, trying to dig the hole deeper. He was arguing with two men in the alley behind the gambling den. The same men he owed money to, trying to convince them to give him more time, more credit, one more chance to make things right. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. The man who just committed felony assault was now begging mercy from criminals who had none to give, trying to get money from people who'd come to take it from him by force. The patrol officers moved in fast, weapons drawn, voices loud and commanding. Marcus Sterling, hands up. Get on the ground now. For a second, Marcus froze, his drug-addled brain trying to process the flashing lights and the badges and the guns all pointed at him. Then his survival instinct kicked in and he did what cowards always do when confronted. He ran. He made it maybe 15 feet before Officer Martinez tackled him into the gravel, his face scraping against broken asphalt, his arms wrenched behind his back with professional efficiency. The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound that meant finality. That meant the running was over. That meant consequences had finally caught up. Marcus started screaming immediately. A stream of excuses and justifications and victim blaming that made the officers hauling him to his feet exchange disgusted looks. She made me do it. She wouldn't give me the money. It's her fault. I didn't mean to hurt her that bad. The words poured out of him like poison, revealing exactly the kind of man he was. Someone who'd break a woman's arm and then blame her for it. Who'd terrorize a child and then claim victimhood. They loaded him into the back of the patrol car, his voice still raised in protest, still making excuses, still refusing to accept responsibility for the violence he'd inflicted and the lives he'd destroyed. The drive to county lockup was mercifully short. And by 12:30 in the morning, Marcus Sterling was processed, photographed, fingerprinted, and locked in a cell where he'd wait for arraignment on charges that included felony assault, child endangerment, elder abuse, and theft. The bail recommendation was high enough that a man who'd stolen $15,000 and had nothing to show for it wouldn't be making it anytime soon. He was done, finished. The monster had been caught, caged, and removed from the lives of the people he'd hurt. But Marcus's arrest was just the beginning of Jennifer and Luna's new reality. Justice had been served, the villain defeated, but the real work, the healing, the rebuilding, the learning to feel safe again. That was just starting. And it would take more than handcuffs and jail cells to make whole what had been broken in that kitchen on Willow Ridge Drive. Dawn broke over Sacred Heart Hospital the way it always did. Indifferent to the dramas that had played out through the night, indifferent to the lives that had been shattered and saved within its walls. The first light filtered through the waiting room windows where Titan Brooks still sat in that same uncomfortable plastic chair, his back aching from hours in the same position, his arms carefully cradling a sleeping 9-year-old who'd refused to let go of him, even in unconsciousness. Luna was wrapped in his leather cut like a blanket. The Iron Wolves patches and insignia that made most people nervous, now serving as security for a child who'd lost every sense of safety she'd ever known. Blade had brought coffee sometime around 3 o'clock in the morning. Phoenix had checked in with the nurses every hour for updates. Viper had gone back to the clubhouse to handle things there and returned at dawn with fresh clothes for Luna and food nobody felt like eating. They'd kept vigil like soldiers on watch because that's what brothers did. And somewhere in the long dark hours of that night, Luna Hayes had become someone worth protecting. At 6:47 in the morning, a surgical nurse emerged through the double doors with the expression medical professionals wear when they have good news, but are too exhausted to smile about it. Jennifer Hayes's family, she called softly, and Titan carefully shifted Luna in his arms as he stood, his muscles protesting the movement. "Right here," he said quietly. The nurse looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the leather, the patches, the incongruous sight of this rough biker holding a sleeping child with surprising tenderness, and something in her tired face softened. "Surgery went well. We were able to repair the compound fracture with pins and plates. She's in recovery now, still groggy from anesthesia, but she's asking for her daughter." Titan felt relief wash through him like a physical thing. Felt the tension he'd been carrying for 8 straight hours finally begin to ease. "Can we see her?" he asked, and the nurse nodded, leading them through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, through the quiet morning hospital where the night shift was ending and the day shift was just beginning. They reached a recovery room where Jennifer Hayes lay propped up in a hospital bed. Her left arm encased in bandages and a temporary splint for lines running into her right arm. Her face pale and drawn but alive, conscious, present. Her eyes were unfocused from the medications, scanning the room with confusion until they landed on Luna. And then everything in her expression sharpened into desperate maternal need. "Luna." Jennifer's voice came out hoarse and cracked, and the sound of her mother's voice woke Luna instantly. The little girl's eyes flew open, took a moment to orient herself, and then she was scrambling out of Titan's arms and rushing to her mother's bedside with a cry that was half sob, half relief. "Mama! Mama, you're okay. You're awake." Jennifer's good arm wrapped around her daughter, pulling her close. And both of them dissolved into tears that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with survival, with being alive when they so easily could have been dead, with having each other when the night could have stolen everything. Titan stood back, giving them space. But Jennifer's eyes found him over Luna's head. Confusion replacing relief as she tried to piece together how she'd gotten here, who this man was, why her daughter was wrapped in an Iron Wolf's jacket. "I don't understand," Jennifer said, her voice weak but determined. "Who are you? What happened?" Luna turned in her mother's embrace, one hand still clutching Jennifer's hospital gown. "This is Titan, Mama. I texted Aunt Rebecca, but I got the number wrong and it went to him instead and he came and he saved us and he stayed with me all night," and the words tumbled out in a rush. Everything spilling over at once, and Jennifer's confusion deepened into something that looked like shock. Titan stepped forward, his movements slow and non-threatening, his voice carrying the same gentleness he'd used with Luna through the long dark night. "Ma'am, my name's Titan Brooks. Your daughter sent a text asking for help. The message came to me by mistake. I responded, my brothers and I got to your house, found you unconscious, called the ambulance, and made sure your little girl wasn't alone." He said it simply, factually, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like anyone would have done the same, even though they both knew that wasn't true. Jennifer stared at him, trying to reconcile the leather and the patches and the reputation she'd heard whispered about iron wolves with the reality of a man who'd spent all night protecting her daughter. The tears that spilled down Jennifer's cheeks now were different. Not relief or pain, but overwhelming gratitude mixed with disbelief and something that might have been shame that a stranger had to save them when the man who claimed to love her had been the one who'd broken her. "Your daughter saved both your lives," Titan said, and his voice carried absolute conviction. "She's the bravest kid I've ever met. She kept her head when everything was falling apart. She got help. She stayed with you. She didn't give up. You raised her right, ma'am. You should be proud." Jennifer pulled Luna closer, kissing the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her daughter and leather jacket and hospital air, and whispered, "I'm so proud of you, baby. So proud." The doctors came through an hour later with good news, tempered by reality. Dr. Rahman, the orthopedic surgeon who'd spent 4 hours reconstructing Jennifer's arm, explained that the surgery had been successful, that the bones were set and stabilized, that with physical therapy, in time, she'd regain most of her function. "You're very lucky," Dr. Rahman said. The luck seemed like the wrong word for a woman who'd had her arm shattered by someone who claimed to love her. "The break was severe, but we got to it in time. Another hour of delay, and we might have been looking at permanent nerve damage, or worse." Jennifer nodded, processing the information through the haze of pain, medication, and emotional exhaustion. And then Dr. Rahman delivered the timeline that made everything real. "We'll keep you for observation for 24 to 48 hours. After that, you'll be discharged with prescriptions, a follow-up schedule, and home care instructions." Home. The word hit Jennifer like a physical blow, and the reality that had been held at bay by crisis and survival instinct came crashing down all at once. She didn't have a home to go back to. The house on Willow Ridge Drive was a crime scene. And even if it wasn't, she could never go back there, never sleep in that kitchen where her blood had pooled on the linoleum, never feel safe in walls that had witnessed such violence. She had no money. What little savings they'd had was the emergency fund she'd refused to give Marcus, and that was maybe $800 if she was lucky. No job that would hold her position while she recovered from major surgery. No family in town except a sister 2 hours away who had 3 kids of her own and barely enough room for them. No plan, no safety net, nothing. The breakdown came quietly at first, just tears sliding down her cheeks as she stared at the hospital ceiling. But then it built into something bigger, something that came from a place deeper than physical pain. "I have nothing," Jennifer whispered, her voice breaking. "No home, no money, no way to keep her safe. How do I protect her with nothing? How do I?" She couldn't finish. Couldn't articulate the terror of being a single mother with a shattered arm and a traumatized daughter and a future that looked like nothing but obstacles and impossibilities. Luna pressed closer, frightened by her mother's tears, and Jennifer tried to pull herself together, but couldn't quite manage it. Titan, who'd been standing quietly by the door, giving them space, stepped forward and pulled a chair up beside Jennifer's bed. His presence was solid, grounding, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone making a promise he intended to keep. "You're not alone anymore," he said simply, and Jennifer's tear-filled eyes met his, searching for the catch, the angle, the thing that would make this kindness make sense. But all she saw was a man who'd already proven he meant what he said, who dropped everything to help a stranger, who'd held her daughter through the worst night of her life and was still here in the cold light of morning. What happened next proved something the media will never tell you about motorcycle clubs. The Iron Wolves Blackstone chapter had been holding regular meetings every Tuesday night for the past 20 years, handling club business, discussing runs and events, voting on matters that affected the Brotherhood. But the emergency meeting called for Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock wasn't regular at all. Titan had sent word from the hospital that he needed the full chapter assembled, that something important had come up, and when the president called an emergency meeting, Brother showed up. By the time Titan walked into the clubhouse at 8:15, leaving Blade at the hospital to stay with Luna and Jennifer, the room was packed with men who'd rearranged work schedules and family obligations to be there. Phoenix stood at the bar, arms crossed. Viper leaned against the pool table. Steele, the club sergeant-at-arms, sat at the main table with a coffee cup in one scarred hand. Axe, who ran the garage on Jefferson Street, had grease still under his fingernails from the early morning shift he'd cut short. Grizzly, the massive enforcer who looked like he could bend steel with his bare hands, occupied a chair that looked comically small beneath his frame. There were others, too. Razor, Thunder, Shadow, Venom. 23 members in total, all wearing their cuts, all waiting to hear what was so urgent it couldn't wait for the regular meeting. Titan didn't waste time with preliminaries. He told them everything. The text message that came to his phone by accident. The little girl's terrified voice. The mother unconscious on the kitchen floor. The violent addict who'd shattered his girlfriend's arm and fled. The overnight vigil at the hospital. The reality that Jennifer and Luna Hayes had nowhere to go, no resources, no safety net, and a future that looked bleak without intervention. He laid it all out in clear, factual terms. And when he finished, the room was silent, except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall and the distant sound of traffic outside. "I'm bringing this to a vote," Titan said. His voice carrying the authority of his position, but also the vulnerability of a man asking his brothers to step up for strangers they'd never met. "I'm proposing that this chapter takes full responsibility for Jennifer and Luna Hayes' protection and support, housing, food, whatever they need to get back on their feet. I know it's not standard procedure. I know we don't usually get involved in civilian situations like this, but that little girl reached out for help and her message found us instead of someone else. I believe that means something. I believe we're supposed to be the ones who answer." He paused, looking around the room at faces he'd known for years, at men who'd bled beside him and trusted him with their lives. All in favor, every single hand went up. Not a moment's hesitation, not a single dissenting voice. 23 men voting unanimously to help a woman and child they'd never met because their brother had asked them to. Because it was the right thing to do. Because the code they live by said, you protect those who can't protect themselves. The vote wasn't even close. It was absolute. And in that moment, Jennifer and Luna Hayes became part of something bigger than themselves. Part of a family that didn't share their blood, but would protect them like they did. The action that followed was swift and organized with military precision. Axe knew a landlord who owed the club a favor, had a 2-bedroom apartment available in a safe neighborhood near good schools. The club treasury covered first month's rent and security deposit without question. Members started showing up with donations, furniture from storage units, clothes their own kids had outgrown, groceries and household supplies, and everything a family would need to start over. Thunder brought a television. Venom brought dishes and cookware. Shadow showed up with bedding still in the package from a store run he'd made specifically for this purpose. But the moment that would stay with Luna forever came when Blade walked into her hospital room that afternoon carrying something wrapped in brown paper. Blade was 63 years old, a Vietnam veteran with prison tattoos covering arms that had seen too much violence. A man whose face was weathered leather and whose eyes had witnessed things that gave him nightmares decades later. He looked like exactly what most people feared when they thought about outlaw bikers. But when he knelt down beside Luna's chair and handed her that package, his gruff voice went soft in a way that surprised even him. "This is for you, little darling. Thought you might like it." Luna unwrapped the paper carefully, her small hands revealing a stuffed unicorn, pristine white with a rainbow mane and glittering horn, the kind of toy that cost more than Blade would ever admit to spending. Her eyes went wide and she clutched it to her chest like it was made of gold. "Every little girl deserves to feel safe," Blade said, his voice rough with emotion. He didn't bother hiding. "This is just the start. You got a whole family now, kid. We take care of our own." But the Brotherhood support went beyond material things. Titan made calls, pulling strings, and calling and favors accumulated over years of operating in Blackstone Valley's complicated ecosystem. Axe needed a part-time office manager at his garage. Someone to handle paperwork and scheduling, someone who could work flexible hours while recovering from injury and taking care of a daughter. The pay was fair, the hours were reasonable, and the position came with the implicit protection of being employed by an Iron Wolves affiliated business, which meant nobody with bad intentions would come around causing problems. Legal aid was arranged through connections the club had with lawyers who understood the value of having the Iron Wolves owe them favors. A restraining order was filed against Marcus Sterling before he even made bail, which he wouldn't because the prosecutor was stacking charges like firewood, felony assault, child endangerment, elder abuse, grand theft. The court case was building into something substantial, something that would put Marcus away for years, and Jennifer wouldn't have to testify alone. She'd have support, protection, people who'd sit in that courtroom and make damn sure the judge understood the full scope of what had been done to her and her daughter. That wrong number text, it didn't just save their lives that night. It gave them a future, gave them hope, gave them something Jennifer had stopped believing existed. A community that cared, that showed up, that turned words into action and promises into reality. 3 months is both forever and no time at all when you're rebuilding a life from ashes. For Jennifer and Luna Hayes, those 90 days between the worst night of their lives and Luna's 10th birthday party were a study in transformation. The nightmares didn't disappear overnight. The fear didn't vanish with the restraining order. But slowly, day by day, hour by hour, they learned what it felt like to breathe without terror. To sleep without listening for footsteps, to exist in a space where violence wasn't lurking around every corner waiting to explode. Jennifer's arm healed better than the doctors had initially predicted. The physical therapy was brutal. The exercises painful, but she attacked recovery with the same determination that had kept her alive through years of surviving Marcus Sterling. By month 2, she had most of her range of motion back. By month 3, she was working full days at Axe's garage, handling scheduling and parts orders and customer service with efficiency that made Axe wonder how he'd ever managed without her. She was good at the job, good with people, good at creating order from chaos. The paycheck wasn't enormous, but it was steady, honest, and came with health insurance and the security of knowing her employers were family now in every way that mattered. Luna thrived in ways that made Jennifer's heart ache with gratitude. New school, new friends, new therapist who specialized in childhood trauma and helped her process what had happened without letting it define who she was becoming. The stuffed unicorn Blade had given her still sat on her bed, but now it was joined by books and art supplies and all the things a 10-year-old girl should have. Her grades were good. Her smile came easier. She still had moments where the fear crept back in, but she was learning that fear didn't have to win, that she was stronger than the worst thing that had ever happened to her. The party at the clubhouse was Titan's idea, though he pretended it was a group decision. The main room had been transformed with streamers and balloons in purple and silver, Luna's favorite colors. Information Titan had filed away from one of their many conversations. There was a cake from the Good Bakery on Capitol Street decorated with unicorns and rainbows because Blade had insisted, and nobody argued with Blade about things involving Luna. Club members showed up with their wives, their girlfriends, their own children who ran around the clubhouse like it was any other family gathering because that's exactly what it was. Phoenix brought his daughter Sophia, who was 11, and immediately took Luna under her wing like a big sister. Viper's twin boys, 7 years old and full of energy, chased each other around the pool table until their mother threatened to take them home. Grizzly's wife brought homemade cookies that disappeared within minutes. Thunder showed up with a remote control car that had Luna squealing with delight. It was chaos and noise and laughter, the kind of celebration that felt normal and safe and exactly what childhood birthday parties were supposed to be. Jennifer stood near the food table, watching her daughter play with other children. Watching these rough men who the world labeled as dangerous treat Luna like she was precious and breakable and worthy of protection. Axa's wife noticed the tears in Jennifer's eyes and squeezed her shoulder. "They're good men," she said quietly. "Once your family forever. You're one of us now." And Jennifer nodded because she couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Couldn't articulate what it meant to go from having nothing and nowhere to having this community, safety, belonging. When the cake was cut and the candles blown out and the presents opened, Titan approached Luna with one final gift. It was small, wrapped simply, and when she tore the paper away, she found a phone, not fancy, not expensive, but brand new and fully charged. "Check the contacts," Titan said, kneeling down to her level like he had that first night when she'd opened the door covered in her mother's blood. Luna navigated to the contact list and saw one name saved. Uncle Titan, her face lit up with understanding and joy. "You ever need anything, you call me," Titan said, his voice serious despite the party noise around them. "Day or night, doesn't matter what time, doesn't matter what it is, you call me. No wrong numbers this time." Luna threw her arms around his neck with the unself-conscious affection of a child who'd learned that this man was safe, that he meant what he said, that he'd proven over 3 months of showing up that he wasn't going anywhere. "You're my hero," she whispered into his leather cut, and Titan felt something crack open in his chest that he thought had calcified years ago. He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. This tiny girl who'd been braver than most adults he'd known, who'd saved her mother's life with a misdialed text and refused to give up when everything was falling apart. "No, sweetheart," Titan said, his voice rough with emotion. He didn't bother hiding anymore. "You're mine. You're the bravest person I've ever met. And don't you ever forget that. If you believe in second chances and real justice, subscribe and share this story. Trolls who hate people helping people want. Comment, I stand for justice if you're not siding with the cowards who hurt the innocent. Let's show the world what real strength looks like. The justice system moves slowly, grinding through procedures and protocols with a pace that can feel agonizing to victims waiting for closure. But sometimes when the evidence is overwhelming and the crimes are clear, that slow machinery produces exactly the outcome it's designed to deliver. Marcus Sterling's trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented medical records showing Jennifer's shattered arm, photographs of the crime scene, testimony from the paramedics who treated her, and a recording of Luna's original call to Titan that the court had subpoenaed as evidence. The defense tried to argue addiction as a mitigating factor, tried to paint Marcus as a man who'd made mistakes rather than choices, but the jury saw through it in less than 2 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Felony assault, child endangerment, elder abuse for stealing from his mother, grand theft. The judge, a woman who presided over too many domestic violence cases and watched too many abusers get second chances they didn't deserve, handed down 8 years in state prison with no eligibility for parole for 5. Marcus would serve real time, hard time. The kind of time that meant Luna would be nearly 18 before he could even apply for early release. Jennifer sat in the courtroom with Titan beside her when the sentence was read. And for the first time since that night in the kitchen, she felt something that might have been peace. Not joy. There was too much trauma for joy, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served, that her daughter was safe, that the monster had finally been caged. Life moved forward the way it does when you're no longer just surviving, but actually living. Jennifer's competence and work ethic at the garage didn't go unnoticed. 6 months after starting as office manager, Axe promoted her to shop manager, putting her in charge of operations and giving her a raise substantial enough that she started looking at houses instead of apartments. A year after that terrible night, she put a down payment on a small 2-bedroom cottage 3 blocks from Luna's school with a yard just big enough for a garden and a front porch where they could sit on summer evenings. It wasn't much by some standards, but it was theirs. Truly theirs. Bought with honest work and filled with safety. Luna flourished in ways that still took Jennifer's breath away. Honor roll every semester. President of her middle school's student council, volunteering at Sacred Heart Hospital on weekends, pushing magazine carts and talking to patients, telling anyone who asked that she wanted to be a nurse someday because nurses had taken care of her mama when everything was broken. The trauma hadn't disappeared. She still saw a therapist monthly, still had occasional nightmares, but it hadn't defined her either. She'd taken the worst experience of her young life and somehow transmuted it into compassion, into a drive to help others, into strength that would serve her for the rest of her life. The Iron Wolves Blackstone chapter remained what they'd become that first night, extended family. Titan came to Luna school plays and science fairs. Blade taught her how to change a tire and check her bike. Phoenix's daughter Sophia became her best friend. The club celebrated her birthdays, showed up for her graduations, existed as a safety net and support system that never wavered. They weren't the family she'd been born into. But they were the family she'd been given, and that turned out to be worth more than blood had ever been. This story isn't about bikers or gangs or stereotypes that the media loves to perpetuate. It's not about patches or motorcycles or the labels society uses to categorize people into neat boxes of good and bad. This story is about a terrified 9-year-old child who reached out for help in the darkest moment of her life and a man who chose to answer even though he had no obligation, no connection, no reason except that it was the right thing to do. It's about how sometimes the heroes don't wear badges or capes or uniforms. Sometimes they wear leather and patches and ride Harleys into the night when a stranger needs saving. It's about how family isn't always the people you're born to. Isn't always defined by shared genetics or last names on legal documents. Sometimes family is the people who show up when you have nothing. Who stay when things are hard. Who prove through action rather than words that you matter, that you're worth protecting, that you're not alone in this world. It's about how one moment of courage. A little girl typing a desperate message with shaking hands. A biker president choosing to respond instead of ignore. A brotherhood deciding to step up for people they'd never met can change the entire trajectory of lives that seemed destined for tragedy. If this story moved you, if you believe in protecting the innocent, no matter what patch someone wears or what assumptions society makes about them, hit subscribe and share this video. Comment what justice means to you, because stories like Luna's deserve to be heard and amplified, and people like Marcus deserve to be exposed for exactly what they are. Cowards who prey on the vulnerable and then cry victim when consequences finally arrive. Let's show the world what real strength looks like. Not the strength to hurt those weaker than you, but the strength to protect them. Not the strength to run when things get hard, but the strength to answer when someone calls for help, even when that call was meant for someone else. Because in the end, Luna's text message wasn't sent to the wrong number at all. It was sent to exactly the right one. To a man who understood that being strong means protecting the weak, that wearing colors means living by a code, that brotherhood means showing up when it matters most. That message, those 12 desperate words typed by a terrified child, traveled through digital space and landed in the hands of someone who chose to be a hero when he could have just as easily been a bystander. And that choice, that single decision to answer, to respond, to care, created ripples that changed everything. Please help. He broke my mom's arm. Mom won't wake up. I'm scared. I'm on my way.